Everybody, welcome to UFO Enigma. I'm Ron Rickey, your host. And this show, I think we're going to concentrate a little bit on the subject of the mass hysteria that usually comes with the subject of UFOs. And with Halloween just about a week past at this taping, my thoughts sort of turned to the famous War of the Worlds show, broadcast in 1938 by Orson Welles. Now, as you probably heard, this was the only real mass hysteria ever to be recorded in the United States, of any size at all. And I'll be taking a lot of my information from an article by Gray Barker, who we've used as a source quite a bit. Published in the Saga UFO Report of 1977. And although this article is 15 years old, I think it's still very relevant, and we're supposed to be getting more sophisticated all the time, and I think it still works today. I think it would be very easy to start a panic even in today's high-tech world. Now, but before we get to that, I got lots of good stuff here. We're going to turn to a little bit to the tabloids. Okay. And of course, this being a 500th anniversary of the birth of the country, discovery of the country, Weekly World News had a nice little article about Columbus and his trip over. Now, the story tells about, this was Weekly World News of October 20th, as I said. The story tells about Columbus's trip across, and of all the programs that have been on, everyone seems to indicate how nice of a trip it was, other than the fact that the men were very edgy, and they didn't know where they were going, and they were undecided and everything. Columbus, I guess if there was belts in seamanship, Columbus probably would have been a 10th degree black belt. He was just an ace. And a lot of people through the years have claimed that he did have some help. Now, the story goes along, and the researcher was Muhammad Ali Yilmaz, and claiming that Columbus did get a hold of a map, or a piece of a map that was drawn up by Turkish Admiral Piri Reis. Now, this was in the 1600s, I guess, that the actual map was drawn up, but Reis actually said that he took a piece of the map that Columbus had. Evidently, there was something like 20 or 25 different maps in the then modern world at the time, and Columbus happened to get his hands on one of these. Now, the amazing thing here is was the detail that this map came out with. According to the article, a lot of these maps even went right back to the time of Alexander the Great. So they were really compiled over many, many years. And one thing about this, now, I have lots of stories on the Piri Reis map, and the amazing thing about this map was it showed South America, it showed the Amazon River, and it even showed Antarctica, which wasn't even discovered until 1818. And going back to the actual voyage, it was so uneventful. They had really no bad weather. It was almost like a cruise, you know. And the fact that being just a good seaman that didn't cut it. He had to have, a lot of people think, had to have some help. In other words, he had a map knowing what was at the end of the voyage, which by no means he told the other crewmen. Now, and another thing about this map, now I got a nice picture of one here from We Are Not Alone by Andrew Thomas. And we can put that up there. Now, that was dated in 1513. Now, this was after Columbus's first voyage, of course, but like we said, these maps were said to have gone back quite a few years. Now, experts down through the years, this particular map here was discovered, rediscovered, say, way back in 1929, and this would be it right here. This other thing had something to do with alchemistry, which maybe we'll touch on later on. Now, everybody that looks at the map says there's no way the map could have been drawn without the aid of a flying machine. So therefore, a lot of people that look at it agree that they had some kind of help from somebody that had a flying machine. And some scientists aren't above saying that right out that they had help from an extraterrestrial. Now, going along with this picture here, the map that Columbus had wasn't an exact copy of this. Columbus was probably part of this. So the thing was, even though there was maybe 20, 25 maps floating around, and Columbus happened to get one, Columbus did have the intestinal fortitude to use it, because at the time, it was probably a matter of time before someone was going to get out there, and it was him. So that takes care of that one. And the same paper, Weekly World News, had another interesting story too, out in the back of it. Okay. This is done up on two particular pages, but we'll see if we can stick it in there. Okay. Now, the headline goes, Space Alien Found Frozen in Egyptian Pyramid. And I've got lots of stories that go back many years about the pyramids, too. And if I can just divert off my course for a minute, Robert, Channel 2 had a good program, WGBH, local station, on the building of the pyramids. And it was a 2-hour program, and I was watching it, and the master builder they had at the time, who was working in conjunction with some historians on how, if it was actually feasible for King Cheops to actually get this big pyramid built within his lifetime before he died. They sort of proved, they built a pyramid that was like 18 feet tall. It was quite small. But they actually proved that it could have been done. But they left you up sort of in the air. They left you hanging saying, why was it done? I mean, these guys really, really worked hard to get this little pyramid up in the air in a certain time limit. They had a time frame to get it done. And they got it done, but the historian at the end says, we know they could probably do it using the tools and stuff they had, but why did they get so many guys together, people, hundreds of thousands of people on this project? The reason is still a mystery. So, as this story goes, in Weekly World, the French archaeologist Paul Cabat discovered the frozen body in the Great Pyramid of Cheops. Now, the spaceman, from what the article says, has been kept frozen in a refrigerator. Now, we were making some jokes earlier about it, and about the electric bill or the price of the extension cord. And
Kenmore or Frigidaire, everyone?
Are we still on? Huh? I think, I don't know, I don't want to name any brand names, but it must have been a good one. I wonder if Maytag makes them. They're supposed to be long-lived. And like I said, now the power source is yet to be determined, but as the article goes on, they're trying now, scientists are starting to get together. I don't know where they get all these spectacular headlines, but they're going to try to find a way to thaw them and revive them. The theories of running rampant of what the man was there for in the first place. And one theory was that the spaceman crash landed, and he survived the crash, and he actually guided the Egyptians in building this pyramid as a beacon for his friends to come and get him. I don't think it worked since his body was still there, but it sort of does go along with the question that the scientist on the Channel 2 show left, was why did this thing happen? You could probably, there's probably a million reasons why it could have happened, but this is probably one good reason. Now, it's my thoughts. I go along with the idea that they did have help. I noticed these fellas last night, they weren't getting the nice, very clean cuts that came along with the actual original pyramids. I mean, they were slicing limestone like it was just like butter. And they used a lot lighter pieces than what's in the actual pyramids. Now, I do have some other articles on pyramids and the UFOs here. And let's see. Saga's UFO Annual of '78 had a nice story on them. And the main thrust of this article was that just the enormous size of not just the Great Pyramid, but all of its little brothers, just precluded the fact that they had to have some kind of help. Mankind alone, it just couldn't, it couldn't handle a task that big, unaided. And they did give a few facts on it. The big one is like 485 feet high. The base covers 13 acres, or 8 modern city blocks. There's 2.5 million blocks thereabouts. And these blocks range anywhere from 3 to 90 ton, with some of the base blocks weighing up to 600 ton. Now, these men that were working on the show last night, they only had, I think, 200 blocks, and they were really struggling with these. And there wasn't the immense size of the originals. And it was an interesting fact in it, saying that as of the writing of this article back in the late 70s, that there wasn't a construction company on Earth that could build this pyramid today. Even if they could you imagine the cost? Now, as a side on this too, it really is too bad that the great library in Alexandria was burned and looted, because I think there were the secrets of how the pyramids were built. I think a lot of knowledge was lost that the Egyptians possessed. They were a gifted people, and it looks like whoever taught them quite well. And when they were overtaken, it sort of just set history back quite a while. Now, that there finishes the tabloid stories for the week, and we will keep checking and see if any updates on that. And now let's get back to the mass hysteria section. Now, I happen to even own a copy of The War of the Worlds, Orson Welles' War of the Worlds, done by the CBS back in '38. And like I said at the beginning now, this was probably the only case of widespread mass hysteria that the country ever had. And I'd like to take the story apart if I could, you know. I've listened to this many times, and if you listen to it right from the beginning, okay, you'd know it was a radio program because they told you it was. That's if you listened to the beginning of the program. Now, like I said, I was taking my information here from Saga's UFO report of '77, and let's just get a little background here. It was a night before Halloween Day, October of 1938, and shows a man here in Grover's Mill with a shotgun. He was getting ready for an invasion. Let me see if we can probably catch it tight on that. And it's quite an extensive story, and there's the genius himself, Orson Welles. And now, if you did miss the sign-on, they sort of started off the show by saying the CBS is presenting Orson Welles' Mercury Theater on the air, and they were going to do a story by H.G. Wells on the War of the Worlds. That was the story that Wells wrote, H.G. Wells. It's funny that Wells and Wells were two guys that were in on this, but the other Wells, H.G., was the visionary that wrote it many years before it was even presented on the radio. But it was funny, there was actually two men named Wells here. Now, it started off something like, after the CBS, the announcer said about the show, Orson Welles come on and did a pretty good monologue. I'd say it lasted probably a minute and a half, 2 minutes. And it says, we know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this earth was studied and so forth and so on. And if you was listening there, you was okay. But if you went out for a glass of milk, or someone knocked on the door, and maybe you was just interrupted or something, and you missed the monologue, you'd be in trouble now, because the show starts off with a weather report. And it was like a local report for the East Coast with a cold front coming down, and it sort of broke in on the middle of the report, and they gave the temperature. Sounded very, very real. And I could see where, if you did break in there, you'd think it was just a radio program, and or an actual weather report. So this was followed by a man coming on now that was saying they were going to present an evening of dance music from the Meridian Room of the Hotel Park Plaza. Now, I'm pretty sure this was a fictitious hotel because they couldn't use a real hotel, but they did use New York, and where they said the orchestra leader, Raymond Racalio, was going to play his music. So I think a lot of the panic might have set in here, but I don't think it really set in here because the people were just who were just tuning in were getting ready to listen to some music. Now, as the story goes along, the orchestra was playing La Compancita and some Spanish some Spanish music, and they finished off the song, and the announcer then says they were going to play Stardust. And as they started playing Stardust, they played about 20, 30 seconds of it, and the first flash broke in. Now, the report, the fake report, said that various observatories in North America have report strange flashes of light on the planet Mars. Now, that said, went on to even say that the flashes were heading towards the Earth, and some of the observatories in the nation around the country analyzed the flashes with the spectroscope and claimed that there was a hydrogen composition. Now, as they're going along now, you can almost see the mood starting to build. And don't forget now, this is a time, no TV, just radio. You used your imagination, and Adolf Hitler was just starting to cause some trouble. I mean, he was just starting to make himself known, and there was a lot of jitters. The country was just starting to get back off of a real bad depression, and the mood was right for something like this. The actual behind the scene crew didn't want to even touch the show. They thought it was too hard to put on, and one of the co-producers was John Houseman, the actor. Him and the writer at the time, they wanted to. The writer says he didn't want to do it, but everything had to be approved by Orson Welles, and they couldn't get in touch with him. They wanted to do Lana Doone instead. It probably would have saved the country a lot of trouble, but it's very interesting. Now, the announcer then goes on to say that they were going to set up an interview with the world-famous astronomer Richard Pearson from Princeton University. And with that, they went back to the dance music again. Now, but to keep the people right on edge, they kept breaking in again. They used more scientist names. They were using German names, and like Hofstadter or something like that from California, and Professor McMillan from Canada. And they broke in the music again before setting you into this scene with Professor Pearson and the reporter. They broke in a couple more times. And when it finally come now, they interrupted some more music, and the reporter said, now we were going to take you with our roving reporter, Carl Phillips, for an interview with Professor Pearson, again restating that he was a very famous, knowledgeable astronomer. That I never found out if there really was a Professor Pearson at that time. So during the, I think this now, between this period and the actual period where they actually went to go see the thing that fell on the farm in New Jersey, that was the time where all the panic set in. This is where people were switching. War of the Worlds really never, I mean, Mercury Theater never had the ratings that their opponent had on another station. Was Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy was a ventriloquist show. And the Bergen show always had a greater following. But to set it up a little bit now, I'm going to have to carry this over to the next show because it goes on. The Bergen show had put on an opera singer. So at the time, the Bergen show was more or less being flashed to a lot of rural areas, and opera just wasn't their cup of tea. So this is when the dials started switching. Right about the time they were doing the interview with so-called Professor Pearson. Now, it takes you, as you're listening to the tape, and they fade from the dance music, and it comes into a room, and what the people in the show actually did, they put a clock in an echo chamber, and that was supposed to be the observatory, and the ticking was the mechanism of the telescope working in the background. So it starts off with Carl Phillips, the reporter, introducing himself and introducing Professor Pearson. And they had a little discussion about the what the light flashes were, what he was doing at the present time. And at the present time, Professor Pearson was watching Mars through his telescope. And at that time, nothing was happening at all. And Carl Phillips, the reporter, asked him, if he thought these were people coming from Mars. And at this moment in time now, Professor Pearson says the whole thing has an entirely natural explanation. It was either volcanic eruptions and shooting off huge fireballs in outer space, and that in time it would, be proven that it was a natural occurrence. And Carl Phillips did go on to ask, he says, what are the chances, of Mars having any kind of life, intelligent life on it? And of course, Professor Pearson was right, we know today, saying the chances were 1,000 to 1 that, any life like we know it was on the planet Mars. Now, during this, see, they're even setting you in deeper and deeper. During this interview, the reporter points out that Professor Pearson had just received a wire, and he asked if he could read it over the air. So Carl Phillips takes the wire from the professor, and he reads in so many words that a huge flaming object had landed on a farm in Grover's Mill, which was actually a place and not too far from supposed Princeton Observatory. So Phillips says, well, what do you think about that? In so many words, gee, that's close. It's a huge fireball. And the professor says, well, I still think it's just a meteorite of just an extraordinary size, and in the morning we will go check it out. So now it flashes back to the music again. That was the end of the interview. And this is when people should have probably got a little bit of the idea that it was a radio program, because the segment didn't last 10 minutes. It lasted quite a bit less than 10 minutes, and the reporter says that for the last 10 minutes we've been talking to Professor Pearson. Now, the whole actual time of the show, I think cutting out commercials and everything, was about 40 minutes. So you can see what a beautiful job they did setting people's minds up. And I'm going to have to stop right now, but we're going to continue this because the article had lots and lots of other sightings that did cause panics. Nothing like the broadcaster 38, but in their own way, just as bad. Guns were fired and whatever. So we'll continue this with the next time, and in the meantime, I want you to keep watching the skies. Bye, everybody.